All right, so we're on to our last helper here, the reduce helper. So I absolutely promise you that we have saved the hardest one for last. So reduce is a tough helper to wrap your head around, but it's also one of the most flexible. Reduce is so flexible, in fact, that we could probably re-implement every other helper that we've covered by just using the reduce helper. So let's check it out with our usual flow. First, we'll write a for loop example, and then we'll refactor it into using the reduce helper. So for this example, we're going to start out with the very classic example of reduce. And if you've never seen this before, trust me, it is a very classic example of reduce. I'm going to make an array of numbers, 10, 20, 30, and then I'm going to make a sum variable and start off at 0. So what I want to do using the reduce helper is I want to sum all of the numbers in this array. So I'm going to sum 10, 20, and 30, and then assign it to the sum variable right here. So we'll do this using a for loop. We'll start off with I equals 0, I less than numbers.length, and then I plus plus. And then for every step through here, we'll take sum and we'll add on numbers at I. And the result is, as you see on the top right, 60. So we can toss down 60 or sum, and yep, we get 60 out of it. So classic use case of for loop here, just to sum up some numbers in an array. Also very classic, again, use case of reduce. So let's see what this looks like with reduce. We call reduce in the exact same fashion as every other helper we've looked at so far, with one little small twist. So let's see what it is. I'm going to do numbers.reduce. Okay, so this part is normal. We write in our function, this part's normal. And now here's where things start getting a little bit interesting. With reduce, we pass in an initial value, okay? So initial value will take the place of the second argument to reduce. So it'll be after function. So I'll do comma 0 right here. And then as the arguments to the function, we'll take in sum and our number. Okay, and I know this is still looking pretty weird. Don't worry, we'll talk exactly about what's going on with the syntax here in a second. And then we'll return sum plus number. And sure enough, we get 60 back. Just to prove it to you, I'll put in the delimiter, and there we go. We get 60 back from our reduce statement here. So the correct number is popping up here, but how in the world is this thing working? So let's look at a diagram and try to figure it out. So this is definitely kind of a little complicated diagram here, so bear with me for just a moment. On the the left-hand side is our numbers array, and kind of, the middle of this thing looks kind of similar to a lot of the diagrams we've seen previously. We've got some element in the array, and we pass it to an iterator function. So that part, not bad, right? We can figure that part out. We've seen it many times before. Here's where things start getting really interesting. At the very top, I've got an initial value. So the initial value was that second argument that I passed to reduce. In this case, I provided an initial value of 0. Now on every step in the iterator function is now getting 2 arguments. It is getting the initial value as the first argument, and then the element in the array as the second argument. So if we go back over to our code, you'll see this sum right here is coming from the initial value, and then the second argument is the element in the array, which in this case is number. So the first time the iterator function runs, it's going to execute, and we return a value of 10, because 0 plus 10 is 10. So the iterator function returns 10, and that's represented by this line right here. This 10 gets piped into the next run of the iterator function as the first argument, and then 20 comes in as the second argument. So putting this into practicality, sum would now be 10 and number would be 20. The iterator function would then return 30, and then for the very last run through the iterator, the value from the previous iteration comes in as 30 as the first argument, and the second argument is 30 out of the array. And so 30 plus 30 is 60. And that's the last step through our iteration, and so we finally get a result out. So in summary, the really weird thing about reduce is that we pass in an initial value, and then this initial value is sent to our iterator function for every single run through it. So this is where reduce gets a lot of its power from, and this is how if you recall a couple sections ago, I mentioned that every sum and reduce start going towards the realm of helper functions where we are kind of condensing down an array to a single value. And that's exactly what reduce is doing here. We are condensing down our entire collection of elements into a single value, in this case, 60. One really interesting thing, or one place where it's very easy to get tripped up, is the initial value down here. So the initial value that we're starting off with 0. We can have any arbitrary initial value that we want. So we can have 0 right here. I could have 1,000 or 100 or negative 30 or 3,000, whatever it might be. Any initial value that we want whatsoever, we can pass in here. We decide what the initial value is based on what we're trying to do with this reduce function, okay? So I think that we've gone through enough odds and ends with summing up an array of numbers. So let's look at a little bit of a harder example in the next section that might help shed a little bit more light on what's going on with it. So I'll see you there.